When the comic industry's hottest creators collectively ditched the big two and started their own publishing company back in 1992, it was a watershed moment in the history of the hobby. Spawn was one of the breakout characters from the Image launch, and the title is still going strong with its 336th issue being released this week. After 30 years on the newsstands, let's take a look at 10 books that every Spawn collector should have in their collection. Let's start the list off with the most obvious book. Just get it out of the way. Spawn number 1. The great thing about being a Spawn collector is that the character's first appearance is readily available and completely affordable. With a whopping 1.7 million copies sold, chances are this one is going to be affordable and available for some time. Published back in May 1992, Spawn was Todd McFarlane's contribution to the newly formed Image Comics, making their first appearances in Spawn number 1 were not only our title character, but also a number of the supporting cast, including Malbolgia, Jason Wynn, Wanda, and Sam and Twitch. You will be able to pick up a copy of Spawn number 1 for between $20 and $30 at just about any LCS or comic show near you. One of my favorite parts about the Collector's Series is that it doesn't really matter what the books are worth. We can put a book on the list just because it's cool, and that's really the case for our number 9 Spawn book, Spawn number 8. Prior to launching Spawn, McFarlane, of course, was famous for his work over at Marvel Comics. His Spider-Man work was particularly popular, and when Marvel launched the new Spider-Man title under the control of Todd McFarlane back in 1990, his cover for that premiere issue would become an instant classic. Looking back at it today, there are just countless homages to Spider-Man number 1, and McFarlane even revisited that cover just 12 issues after Spider-Man 1 for August 1991 Spider-Man 13, which featured Spider-Man in the black costume. Well, once the Todd father and Marvel parted ways, it was really just a few short issues into the Spawn run when McFarlane circled back around and borrowed from himself once again for the cover to Spawn number 8. This February 1993 issue was written by fabled comic writer Alan Moore and also included a pinup from Frank Miller. Despite its collectability for the cover homage, Spawn number 8 is an extremely affordable book and can readily be found for between $3 and $5. We may be in the holiday season, but this holdover from Halloween stuck with me after it was included in a top 10 list earlier this year. Coming in at number 8 is Spawn number 88. This issue was published back in October 1999, and honestly, it's a cover buy for me. Rocking pencils from Greg Capullo and inks from Todd McFarlane for the cover art, this one checks so many spooky vibe elements for me. You've got black cats, jack-o'-lanterns, a spooky tree that's backlit by a full moon, and this shady-looking owl that's just kind of hanging out. The market seems to like this cover too, as this book routinely sells for between $15 and $20, which makes Spawn 88 one of the more valuable issues out of the first 100 issues of the Spawn series. Which makes Spawn 88 one of the more valuable books out of the first 100 issues of the series. When you grant favors, you get to call in favors, and that kind of appears to be the case for our number 7 book, Wizard Magazine number 11. If you remember back to Wizard number 1, the first thing that likely comes to mind is the now classic Todd McFarlane Spider-Man art that's on the cover. McFarlane was one of the hottest artists in the industry at the time, and there's little doubt that landing him for that cover was a major boost to the startup magazine. So how do you repay such a favor? Well, when the artist and a bunch of his friends from the industry quit the big two and kind of go do their own thing a few months after you start your brand new comics magazine, you give them a small set of consecutive covers for said new magazine. Beginning with Wizard 10, which featured Rob Liefeld's Youngblood, through Wizard number 12, that had a Wildcats cover from Jim Lee, Wizard not only gave the new Image Comics titles the cover of their magazine, they also shipped them with a collectible card of the corresponding IP. So, like the other mentioned issues, such was the case for Wizard number 11 and its Spawn cover from Todd McFarlane. Inside, you'd also find a Spawn poster and some polybagged goodness, bringing you a Spawn trading card just for good measure. Sealed copies have been selling in the neighborhood of $20 to $25 lately, and apparently we're all starting to run out of things to collect because Wizard magazines appear to be creeping up in value and demand in the current market. In the number 6 spot is a book that sharp-eyed viewers may be able to make out in the background of my videos from time to time, Spawn number 32. Spawn 32 is where we see the Spawn costume get really gnarly for the first time. After getting torn to shreds in issue 31 by the Redeemer, Spawn went into issue 31 looking a bit like Batman, like he had really since the beginning, but by the time he picks himself up off the floor in issue 32, he's gone full punk rock. More chains, more spikes, a tattered cape, and a sprinkling of some oversized armor here and there. To me, this is the iconic Spawn look, and it also made for a pretty badass figure when Spawn 2 was released as part of the fall 1995 Spawn Series 3 wave of toys from McFarlane Toys. Spawn 32 was published in June of 1995 and features a Todd McFarlane cover and script, while Greg Capullo shares the interior art duties with McFarlane. This is another readily available issue from early in the run, and copies can typically be picked up for between $3 and $5. Coming in at the number 5 spot is Spawn number 2, the first appearance of Spawn's longtime nemesis, the Violator. Appearing in both of his personas in this issue, we first meet the Clown, and as the issue moves along, we see the demon in his true form as the Violator. Spawn 2 sets up the first battle between Spawn and the Violator that would transpire across issues 3 and 4. Published back in June 1992, McFarlane handles the cover and interior art duties along with the issue's script. Despite the importance of this issue's first appearance, the value for Spawn number 2 has remained fairly low, which can most likely be attributed to the sizable print runs for these early issues. Affordable prices are good for a comic budget that may be feeling the pressure of increasing prices for necessities, so the $10 to $12 price point for this key Spawn issue is thankfully budget friendly. The 90s were a wild time. You had the Big Two do a crossover event where the heroes faced off against each other. Then that series led to a string of one-shots where an amalgamation of their characters hit the newsstands. Shout out to Dark Claw for being the best of the group. And when DC characters had some free time, after and in between all that, they invited characters from Image over to hang out, and thus we have our number 4 book, Spawn Batman. Now here's what this book has going for it. First, it's all Todd McFarlane art. Second, Frank Miller writes the story. In addition to that, you also have pinups from Greg Capullo and a collaborative pinup from Todd McFarlane and Frank Miller. Cover dated for the spring of 1994, the book contains a dedication to Jack Kirby, who had passed away earlier that year on February 6, 1994. As far as the story goes on this one, it's pretty much what you would expect for such a book. One of the characters travels to the home of the other character, and events transpire that cause the two of them to come into conflict, just like every other story out there where two heroes fight each other. Earlier in 2022, Todd McFarlane announced that another Batman Spawn one-shot would be coming out, and it's slated to be released on December 13th, 2022. That announcement caused a spike in attention for this original crossover, and it is currently selling for around $20 for a high-grade raw copy. We all know that Spawn's costume is alive, right? Do you know its name? It's known as the K7 Letha. Our number 3 book, Spawn 233, tells the origin of the K7 Letha. Published in July 2013, Spawn 233 comes from a pretty tough time for the Spawn comics series. Orders have been decreasing for quite a while, and by the time Spawn 233 came out, it had just a print run of only 15,701 copies, which makes it one of the more challenging issues to track down. Less than a year later, Spawn number 243 would receive the lowest number of orders in the history of the title with just 11,714 copies. The origin story of Spawn's costume would continue into the following issue, but the market tends to favor 233 value-wise, as its $20 price point overshadows issue 234's $15 value. Coming in at number 2 is Spawn number 61. This issue makes the list for a couple of different reasons. First and foremost, it's the first time we see Jessica Priest in Spawn comics. And while this appearance is just a cameo, it's noteworthy of why she's introduced, so let's get into that. The year is 1997 and Spawn is blowing up big time. In May, an HBO animated series debuted. In August, we would see a live-action Spawn movie released into movie theaters, but we had a problem. All the way back in Spawn number 12, it was revealed that Chapel, who was a member of Rob Liefeld's Youngblood team, had killed Al Simmons, which kicked off the change of events that led to him becoming Spawn. Unfortunately, as we all know from watching the MCU over all these years, when you don't own the rights to a character, using them in your movie can be problematic. So enter Jessica Priest. In Spawn 61, Spawn's previous origin story began to get the retcon treatment as the clown starts to plant doubts in Spawn's mind about who actually killed him. The second reason that this book makes the list is that Priest's cameo appearance is her being suggested as the actual killer of Al Simmons, not Chapel. Sales for Spawn 61 have mostly been ranging between $10 and $20 as of late, but if you're interested in the first full appearance of Jessica Priest, be sure to check out Curse of the Spawn number 12. Topping the Spawn Collector Series top 10 list is Spawn number 100. Who doesn't love a classic anniversary issue, right? Throughout the history of comics, issues like number 100, 200, 300, and so on have often been standout moments, leading these anniversary issues to become keys within the hobby. Amazing Spider-Man was really great at this. In issue 100, you have a great cover and Spidey grows 4 extra arms. 200, you kill the burglar that killed Uncle Ben all the way back in AF-15. And then in issue 300, you get the first appearance of Venom, one of his biggest villains. Issue 400, Aunt May dies. You just never knew what was going to happen when you hit such an issue, and Spawn kept the anniversary issue tradition alive when the issue count rolled up to the century mark. Spawn 100 brought the heat story-wise, as 2 major characters from the first 100 issues of the book both die in the story. Neither angels nor devils were spared, as Angela and Malebolgia both don't live to see issue 101. Malebolgia died because Spawn was mad that he killed Angela. Angela died because the courts ruled that Todd McFarlane didn't own the rights to the character anymore, and she had to be turned over to Neil Gaiman, who then sold her to Marvel. You really can't make this stuff up. While we're here, let's go ahead and give an honorable mention to Angela's first appearance back in Spawn number 9. While the book didn't officially make the list, it's a must-have for Spawn collectors and deserves a mention at least. Published back in November 2000, Spawn 100 had an A cover from creator Todd McFarlane, but in addition to that, 5 variant covers were also released from the following artists: Ashley Wood, Frank Miller, Mike Mignola, Alex Ross, and Greg Capullo. The A cover currently sells for around the $25 mark, but the market has decided that the Greg Capullo variant is actually the preferred cover, and that one is going to set you back in the neighborhood of $50 in the current market. I mentioned this in the intro, but Spawn is still going strong after more than 30 years of publication. For perspective, when Todd McFarlane left Marvel and Spider-Man back in late 1991, Spider-Man had not even reached his 30th anniversary yet. So as we sit here today, the Spawn character is older now than Spider-Man was at the founding of Image Comics. That fact just seems crazy to me. As a kid in the 90s, I loved how edgy Spawn was compared to most standard Marvel or DC superhero comics. The art was always amazing, even if the stories might have seemed a little out there from time to time. And really one of the most enjoyable things about Spawn to me was the way the character permeated beyond the comics. The founding of Todd Toys, which we now know as McFarlane Toys, the HBO animated series, the movie, Spawn really was a movement in the 90s, and it was a fun property to follow, which is why I'm not surprised that the character continues to reach new audiences and gain new fans year after year. Collect responsibly, and I'll see you in the next video.